Hello, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Taïssa Danilovich. I've recently started working here at Monash and going away from stellar and planetary births, looking more at their deaths. I'll be talking about AGB stars. So just quickly, what is an AGB star? So these are low to intermediate mass stars. So we normally say with initial masses between 0.8 and 8 solar masses, though this depends a little bit on metallicity. And these are stars that have run out of hydrogen and helium in their cores to burn. They're just having nucleosynthesis happen in some shells, which makes them unstable and skipping a lot of the science. They're ejecting the outer layers of their atmosphere in what we call a stellar wind, or sometimes referred to as a circumstellar envelope. And in this stellar wind, we have the formation of a large variety of molecules and also of dust. So these stars are the centers of dust creation, or a key center of dust formation in the universe. So we want to understand, how that's happening, what they're doing, how long they last. One of the key parameters that we want to understand is mass loss rate, so how quickly they're ejecting material. And then I'm also interested in what type of dust, what type of molecules, what abundances of things. So the way we used to study AGB stars before ALMA came along was pretty one-dimensional. We'd have single dish observations, which spatially would just give us 1 point, so some sort of spectrum that looks something like this. Even though that's from Herschel, which is a space telescope, it's still basically just one point in space that generally covers the whole star, so the whole circumstellar envelope. Because of this, of course, we had to make a lot of assumptions. We assumed a lot of spherical symmetry, kind of assumed that in most cases where we didn't obviously see something to the contrary, that most stars were single or at least isolated. So a little bit what I mean by that is if there was a companion, it was far away enough not to really matter. So yeah, we made a lot of assumptions, but we could use this to derive mass loss rates and molecular abundances for whatever we saw. But then came ALMA. And I think a lot of you are probably familiar with this image. This is an observation, a quite early observation with ALMA of CO around a carbon-rich AGB star called R Sculpturus. And the point of the observation was to look at this outer ring in this image, which is called a detached shell. So we knew that was there. We could tell that from the spectral lines. But what they didn't expect to see is this spiral inside the detached shell. So the exciting paper by Matthias Merker et al. Was that, well, how do we explain this? And the only way that makes sense is by saying there's probably a companion. So this was published in 2012, and we still haven't actually detected that companion. We've looked at more spirals in higher resolution and all this sort of thing. So we can tell it's there. We can derive some properties about the orbit and from that sort of the mass, but we haven't seen it. So I think it's a star, but yeah. So since then, we've basically discovered that every AGB star we look at with ALMA is a special snowflake, and none of them are simple. Here is some further examples. This is from the Atomium Large program, which I'm a part of, and in this little fun plot, this is selected channels for each star where blue is coming towards us, red is going away, and white is in the plane of the star. So we can see some interesting shapes here. We've got something that looks a bit like an hourglass in this one for R Hydra. A little bit less obviously for Pi Gru, but we've got bipolar jets there, which, less obvious there, but when we analyze it further, that's true. We see several spirals, different kinds of spirals, like these stars are all oxygen-rich. They don't have detached shells. That's a carbon star thing for reasons slightly unclear. And we also see this kind of thing like Auriculae here, which looks like a rose, which is a bit like a spiral, but also not just like a spiral. And it's all a bit mysterious. So I will start off by talking a little bit about W Aquilae, which is a star I have studied extensively. And so I should say also this plot, this is all CO that we're looking at here. And now I'll show the full channel maps for CO for W Aquilae. this is also a higher resolution than the previous image, spatial resolution. You can see there's things that could be spirals, there's all sorts of arcs, it's all very chaotic. How do we even begin to analyze this in terms of SPH models to understand the dynamics? The answer is we stared at it for a long time before we came to the answers I'm about to present. But to start with, I selected these 3 central channels. So the stellar velocity is minus 23 kilometers per second. So the 3 closest to that, just to increase the signal to noise. And I get this sort of plot, which to guide the eye, I have drawn some circles on. So first, just a little bit about CO observations when it comes to AGB stars. There's a few problems that we suffer from. There's resolved outflux. So because of a lack of small spacings, depending on what you're looking at, what you were expecting to see versus what ALMA actually sees, for example, or maybe just time constraints in terms of observational requests. There's noise. So this is quite a high resolution image. This little white dot here is the synthetic beam size, which means we can see a lot of structures, but it also means that in between those structures, there's a lot of noise or they're kind of a bit blobby. We can reduce the resolution of this. I mean, we have an extensive data set. We can combine in different ways. But of course, if we reduce the resolution too much, we stop seeing a lot of structures. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. And I mean, I've made this bigger so you can see things a bit more than on the previous slide, but there's still a lot going on there. I've drawn those 2 circles on, which I came to from staring at this for a long time, but they're not the only structures you can find, right? You can add a spiral or 2, or you can find another circle that's off center and all this stuff. It gets a bit complicated. I should also mention that W Aquilae is known to be a binary system. So here the red star is the AGB star and the yellow star is a main sequence companion, classification F9. They look close together in that image, but they're about 0.5 of an arc second apart in projected separation, which on the scale of AGB stars and how dense the wind is in that region is actually not that close. It's a bit more obvious when I show another plot later. So from looking at just CO, okay, we can maybe see some structures, but it's a bit hard to explain them. And CO is the molecule that's been used the most because it's ubiquitous for AGB stars and it's a good tracer of density. But there are other molecules that we can consider. So just a general example for carbon stars, HC3N has been used as tracing a similar, well, in a different star, but a similar spiral to what I showed earlier. HC3N followed the same kind of spiral arm as CO in this paper, Kim et al. But we can also look at molecules that don't just trace the density traces. So what I'll now talk about is some molecules form because of interactions with the stellar companion. And SIN is the example that I will show, though it's not the only one that we found, but for more details, see the paper I will submit shortly. So here is a moment zero map of SIN, and you can see it's quite asymmetric relative to the position of the AGB star. So generally speaking, for AGB stars, with a few exceptions, most molecules are more or less blobs, more or less centered on the star. I mean, even in some of those more dramatic examples I showed earlier, when we get to other molecules that are less extended than CO, they're still usually centered on the star. And this, although it overlaps with the star, is not centered on the star. So I took a PV diagram along that axis that I've plotted there, the dotted line. Well, I tried every angle, but that's the one that worked. And we see in the PV diagram, so the position velocity diagram, that this isn't just like a triangle of emission, it's actually an arc that we're seeing edge on in the plane of the sky, edge on relative to the plane of the sky, I should say. So this is all very exciting, and skipping over a lot of detailed background analysis, what we worked out was SIN mainly forms in these kinds of stars when there is additional UV photons. We need UV photons to liberate Si, also to create Si+, which is sort of in the chemical equations that lead to SIN. And the way that can happen is if a source of UV flux is present close to the AGB star, which means in the dense region close to the gas, in the dense gas region close to the star. This is the case because further away, yeah, the UV photons can drive some reactions, but because the medium is just less dense, it's roughly a power law in density. So further out, it's less dense, and the chemical processes don't happen as readily, and maybe some photodissociation happens, but then those atoms or molecules don't bump into the next thing they need to create whatever the next molecule is. So generally, chemistry runs a lot faster the denser the environment is. So, said we know there's a companion here. We have some like photometric observations of this companion, and it's basically not moved in 15 years, or barely moved. So from that, we can't really derive the orbit from just the photometry. I mean, we have basically 2 points. But if we assume that it's an eccentric orbit that's edge-on, sort of based on this, if we say that, well, what if the companion went past the AGB star and that's what caused the SAN formation at periastron, then everything makes sense. So from the circles I drew on the CO earlier, which I'll show again in a few slides, we can estimate the orbital period. This is linked to phantom, which again, I'll show in a moment. We can estimate the time since the last periastron from the SIN and the time it took to expand to where we currently see it. And that's about 200 years ago-ish. And then because the SIN is so side-on, we can say that the inclination of the orbit is pretty much edge-on. I plotted here with an inclination of 85 so you can see it. Otherwise, it's just a line. But it's pretty much 90 degrees. So there was a lot of feedback in terms of looking at what we get from the phantom model and what we see in the observations and what this could all mean. So here is a little video of a model that Jolene made. And this is a slice through where the stars are present in the center, but viewed edge on. So the orbit is going this way. And you can see that these circles are formed. And if I take a freeze frame and rotate it, this matches the circles that I drew on before. So this all works. There's more chemistry in the paper, but yeah, we can use additional traces, like additional molecules, to actually determine the orbit, which with just photometry is not possible because the orbital period is about 1,000 years. I'll just quickly move on to another star. This is IK Tau, which has been studied a lot. This plot is from HCN, which I included just because there was already a nice picture of it, but CO looks, broadly speaking, similar with some structures. There's maybe a spiral. It's a bit hard to see in just the channel maps. But because there's a spiral, we think there might be a companion, but this companion hasn't been detected at all. And a student of mine looked at NaCl, which is not a very well-studied molecule, and actually neither is SIN, if you're wondering. And for NaCl towards IK Tau, we see these weird blobs. And why? I mean, they're also not centered on the star, which is this red dot. So what does this mean? Well, he made some 3D modeling, and from this molecular tracer, which is not tracing the density, we see that actually those blobs form a spiral when we deproject that into real space instead of velocity space. And I mean, what is this? Is it maybe like a planet being destroyed by the wind? That's the best guess I've got, but we're not sure. And like the spacing of these blobs doesn't perfectly synchronize with, for example, pulsations, or it's not perfectly synchronized with pulsations. We're not getting a blob per pulsation. There's too many gaps. But this is tracing something different to what we're seeing here. So like to understand the full picture, we have to be able to explain everything that we see ultimately. Which brings me to my conclusion, which is we should not just look at CO when we're looking at observations, And when we're trying to understand the structures in winds and what's causing them and why, we should consider other molecules. For AGB stars, we almost always detect a whole range of molecules. So, we shouldn't ignore them. We should also take them into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Wonderful talk. I have a question about the simulation. How do you implement the AGB star in Phantom, the one that is the central star?
Jolene is the person to answer that.
That's actually Lionel's work. So Lionel and Daniel Price together implemented that. Lionel is giving a talk on Wednesday. So
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Do you have a good idea about the eccentricity distribution for post-AGB binaries? Like, are all of them as eccentric as this one? Or do you have like different structures created by, I don't know, more circular binaries?
So this is an interesting point, because one of the questions in post-AGB stars and bar-IM stars, which are like another type of after AGB star, but with different reasons, they're found quite eccentric, or a distribution of eccentricity that does go quite high. And the question was sort of why, how, is there some sort of eccentricity pumping? But we're seeing a high eccentricity already on the AGB phase, so perhaps it's not necessary. On the other hand, did it form like this? Not sure. The stars don't pass, or the main sequence star doesn't go inside the Roche limit of the AGB star, so it's not a like very dramatic interaction, I guess we can say. And it seems stable, though. In the ALMA field of view, we only get like 2 circles. There's maybe another one further out, but then it's a bit cut off, and we would have had to do a mosaic, which we didn't. So.
And another very short question: how does GWST change the picture about the chemical characterization of these sources? Because I think there is one recent observation of one of these spirals going all out the way.
That is a Wolf-Rayet star, which is a massive star,
Oh, yeah, sorry.
not a low or intermediate mass star. So the ones inside our galaxy are a bit tricky to observe with JWST because they're too bright. We need to use a coronagraph, and this isn't happening. We don't have time for that yet. Some people are looking at LMC, SMC, AGB stars, but it will be interesting to see the spectra, because I know MIRI, the MIRI instrument, is much higher resolution than what we had from Herschel PAX and Spire. Spire? That's what it's called, right? Anyway, it was terrible, that instrument. Oh my God. We'll learn a lot more about the dust, and we'll have a much higher resolution look. But for molecules, it would be nice to have another space telescope, which is not JWST, in the millimeter, sub-millimeter range. Yeah.
All right. Any last questions? No? Then thank you again very much. And